Do you feel satisfied sexually? As much as we've tried to communicate around this, I find myself still feeling sometimes that our sex life defaults to him having the satisfying sex that he wants. I don't want him to think I don't enjoy the intimacy we do have because I love it. I just want a little more. Maybe over dinner one night, it could be fun. If you are lying there and you want to switch it up, instead of just feeling frustrated that he hasn't flipped you over, ask him, like, what is good sex to you? What turns him on? And the right man will not be threatened by you. He doesn't care about your pleasure as much as he cares about his. That's not a man worthy of a woman of your caliber. Hello, 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 hazelnuts. Welcome back to the show. This week we're doing something that we haven't done before, and that is talk about sex. I'm also answering a letter from a man for the first time. I don't get too many letters from men, and I was really excited to answer a question from a man, a very sensitive man, but I don't want to give too much away yet. Anyways, we're talking about sex, and this idea came up from a Hello Hayes Ask Me Anything I did on Instagram a few weeks ago, where I got a lot of questions about different people who are navigating like different sexual desires in their relationships and aren't feeling satisfied, want to try something new, are doing it for the first time. And it got me interested. I hadn't intentionally been avoiding this topic. I had not intentionally been avoiding this topic, but I've been making Hello Hayes for, a year and a half now, and I haven't focused too much on sex and talking about sex. And when I went into my inbox and looked for these letters, something super interesting was each one of them began with, Hello Hayes, I don't know if this is something you normally talk about, but, and then continued in. I deleted that from I deleted it from the document from when I actually read you the letters. I never make significant edits to the letters when I read them to you. Sometimes I will edit something for clarity, never to change the meaning. And I usually won't, if there's sometimes the letters have a paragraph in the beginning, like, thank you so much for your work. Really lovely things that are wonderful for me to hear, but I don't need to read them to you. But I thought it was interesting that so many of these letters began with, I'm not sure if you ever talk about this, but, and for the record, let the record show that you can write to me about anything. Nothing is really off limits. Sometimes I might not answer something. There's many reasons why I won't answer a letter, but there's nothing that's off limits. You should, if you have a story that moves you, that you would like insight on, or you want to share with someone, consider that a perfect story to share with Hello Hayes. So that's what we're talking about today, sex. With that, let's dive right in. Hello Hayes. I've been married for almost 4 years now, and overall, my marriage has been great. My wife and I get along swimmingly. We hardly ever fight, we're best friends, and it's easy and fun to be together. I truly love her and don't picture myself with anybody else. The one thing that hasn't been great is our sex life. We don't do much physically or intimately. She recently told me that she believes that she's asexual, which I understand and respect, and it explains some things for sure. She also told me that if I wanted to, I could sleep with other people since, in her words, she doesn't feel like she's doing enough to satisfy me sexually. As long as I tell her about it and I'm not sneaking around behind her back, she would be okay with it, she says. Honestly, it wasn't anything I ever thought about before she said it. Sure, I wish my wife and I were more sexually compatible and active, but it isn't something I would ever leave her for. But I'm also now wondering if this would be healthy for our relationship. Maybe I'd be happy having a more active sex life, and she would be happy not feeling pressured to have sex or feel like she's disappointing me. I'm not really sure how to approach this situation or what to do, and I would love an outsider's perspective. Thanks so much for your help. Yours, What Will Make Us Satisfied? Well, I want to start off by telling you some things that I admire, because I admire so many things going on here in the letter. I admire the way in which, through this letter, you're seeing and respecting your wife. Like, when I think about marriage, and something I talk a lot about, I guess publicly, but maybe it's something more that I've thought about privately. Maybe I've talked about it publicly, is like, marriage is a big deal. And I think sometimes when people talk about marriage and forever and commitments, sometimes those commitments sound to me like you're committing and you're promising the thing you have right now. And sometimes when I hear people talk about marriage and love and what they hope for the future, they fail to consider how things might change. And for me, when I think about marriage, yes, there's the hope that, the marriage and the relationship continues as is, and all of the things that we love about our significant other right now will continue. I think it also has to leave room for the fact that we don't know what the future will bring, right? Anybody who says that they know what's going to happen in the future of their relationship, like none of us, that's magical thinking. And while your wife, I don't know when your wife discovered that she is asexual. Maybe it's something that she's known for a while. I don't know what her coming out journey has been like. I think that, the reason I'm saying that is because I'm hesitant to like call it a change in your relationship, though it is a change in that before she was not out or talking about her asexuality and now she is. I think you're demonstrating this thing that I believe in, which is like marriage and forever partnership is about loving and respecting the other person as they evolve, as they step into who they are, even when that's not convenient. And love is not always like doing what's best. I think love is about doing what's best for each other individually, because what's best for you individually is ultimately what will be best for you as a couple. And I don't know if I'm articulating myself well there, but I really admire how it's easy to say all that, right? It's easy to say oh yeah, marriage is about being with each other through the road bumps. Not that your wife's sexuality is I don't want to frame it as like a road bump or as a negative thing. However, entering your relationship, getting married, what's the way to say it? I'm being careful with my words because it's like having your wife come out as asexual. I don't want to frame it as a negative thing. And the reality is, like, when you married her, you didn't know she was asexual, or that wasn't a part of maybe you did know and you weren't talking about it, or it wasn't, it's a new thing that's entering your relationship. And it's so easy to just say, yeah, like, we'd figure it out. But here you are faced with a new reality in your relationship. And I admire the way in which you're kind of, you're looking at your wife with kind of open arms and curiosity and optimism. And I really respect and admire that. I respect and admire it. And I don't know if all men would, certainly not all men would do that. And I think, I just think that's something to acknowledge. And I also admire the way that you're asking questions about what's going to be best for your relationship. Like, you are admitting what you don't know and what kind of open gaps there are. And I think that's going to be, if I were in your shoes, I would also hope that I'd be asking the same types of questions that you are. And from an outside perspective, I think the way through this is by asking questions. There's going to be a learning curve here. You have to be open for the learning curve because there's certainly going to be one. So before we go much more, I do want to talk about what asexuality is for any hazelnuts listening who don't know. I had to do a little bit more reading up before I started thinking about my response to this letter, or in tandem to while I was thinking about my response to this letter, and I was looking at the Trevor Project. Where did my link go? I had it up and now I don't. Please hold. Trevor Project. All right, here it is. So I want to talk a little bit about what asexuality is. So number one, before I define it, asexuality exists on a spectrum. It is an umbrella term. If one person, two people can both be asexual, and what that looks like and the way they feel and the way they exist in their relationships could both be very different. It's not a one-size-fits-all sexual identity. So within that umbrella, asexual people are folks who may have little interest or no interest in having sex, though they do desire other forms of intimate connection. Within the asexual umbrella, like, aces will have different responses to sex. Some might be more hard, like, I'm not doing it. Others might be more willing to compromise or have sex under certain circumstances within certain boundaries. It's again not a one size fits all. So you wouldn't be able to say, oh, this person's asexual and therefore that means they never have sex. You couldn't say that. Some asexual people might have sex, others might not. Asexuality is not a disease or a PTSD. It is a sexual orientation, just like being gay, straight, etc. I think the number one thing is that sexuality exists on a wide spectrum and asexuality is included there. As I go through the rest of the letter, let's keep that in mind. And I'm keeping that in mind as I'm coming up with solutions or ideas for how you can talk to your wife about this and how the two of you may may begin to work through this kind of exciting new opportunity together. Because that's how I think we can see it. You can look at it as an opportunity that's going to come with, newness, and newness can be strange to navigate. But based on the vibes I'm catching from your letter about how you care, like the way that you love and the way that you show respect and, the relationship that you two have, I do see this as an opportunity. I think that compromise is going to be necessary here for both of you. And I think that compromise, since this is new for both of you, your wife has been asexual for longer than you are learning that she's asexual, and longer than that you've learned about kind of these new options and have begun to think about the new ways in which your marriage might begin to work. But together, like the two of you at the same time are talking openly about what your marriage can look like. You both are starting that on the same day. And I think the way you talk about compromise right now on day 1 or day 30, whatever it is, the compromises might look different in 2 months, 3 months. We're not going to this isn't a one-time conversation when we figure out, this isn't a one-time conversation when we're like, okay, so here's what we're going to do, and we're going to try that, and if that doesn't work, we're never going to try it again. It's probably going to be an ongoing conversation. So some questions that came up for me that I would want to think about if I were in your shoes. So knowing that asexual people, or actually, hold on, pause. I want to point out something from your letter. You wrote, she also told me recently that if I wanted to, I could sleep with other people since, in her words, she doesn't feel like she's doing enough to satisfy me sexually. I thought that was so interesting that you called that out, that it was in her words. I think you're doing that because you want me to know that you're not saying that you didn't say that. But I want to know how you do feel. How do you feel? You mentioned that you wish you were more sexually compatible and active, but it's not something you'd leave her for. Have you given yourself the space to kind of fully reflect on what your desires are? Because again, going back to the compromise thing, yes, it absolutely means honoring your wife's boundaries and doing things that feel consensual and enjoyable for both of you. And I don't think the relationship and your marriage will continue to work if you're ignoring your desires. So I want to remind you, or maybe not even remind, but empower you that you have desires too. And your desires are also important. And is she doing enough to satisfy you sexually? But I wonder, that phrasing might not gel with you, since I know you're protective of your wife, and we don't want to blame her at all. So maybe the better way to phrase it is, do you feel satisfied sexually? Do you feel satisfied? And if the answer is no, that's okay. It doesn't mean that your relationship is doomed, or that you don't love your wife, or that you don't accept your wife for who she is. But I think it's important to begin this conversation from an honest standpoint. Your wife is coming to you being honest, and I think you owe it to your relationship and to yourself to also bring that same honesty here. So, do you feel satisfied? You wish you were more sexually compatible and active. How so? What are the types of experiences or feelings that you're longing for? Is it sex that you want to be having sex more frequently? Are you looking for more physical intimacy? But ask yourself that, and allow yourself to think about that, to think about whether you're satisfied and what would feel satisfying. Because then when you come to your wife and you have these conversations together, you've reflected on your needs and you're not only thinking about hers. Because it's got to be balanced here. So now that I've addressed that, let's talk about some questions. So some questions that I would want to think about. So in reading a little bit more about asexuality, I understand now that, and it sounds like your wife is not interested in physical sex. I'm curious, what type of attraction does your wife experience? Does she experience different types of attraction, like sensual attraction? Does she like any types of physical touch? Are there certain acts of romance or chivalry that turn her on or make her feel good? Are there other emotional attractions that feel really good for her? Because again, asexual people, while they may not want to have sex, they do still desire companionship and emotional relationships, right? Is that the best way to say it? Here, I had this great little chart up. Yeah, aces might want friendship, understanding, and empathy to fall in love. So a question for you to discuss with your wife is like, I know we've covered that you're not so interested in sex. Are there other types of intimacy that you are interested in? Because from there, you might be able to find ways to be a better lover for your asexual partner. Like, you might be able to, if you learn, for example, that she really likes, being snuggled or being kissed on the face. I don't know. There might be some ways in which you could approach sex and have sexual encounters that feel good for her, and you could be catering more to the things that she does like, and maybe if within her boundaries she is willing to have physical sex with you, like there could just be a new way where you could kind of redefine what physical intimacy looks like by catering to her needs and learning how to be a more skilled lover for what she likes, and seeing if there are ways where she's willing to compromise for you, which I guess is an important question actually to ask. Like, is your wife open to having sex? Is your wife open to having sex within some boundaries that feel good for her? Or is she not wanting to have sex at all? I don't quite know. I don't feel clear on that reading your letter, and I wonder if you feel clear on that. And if not, that could be something to talk about. I was reading a little bit on Reddit. I'm a huge Reddit fan these days, by the way. I think I had gotten Reddit as I had put Reddit in my head with like such a bad reputation because of the way that Reddit is used to like bully people. But I've been obsessed with Reddit recently. On my most recent trip to Hawaii, I did a ton of research on Reddit. And I also think there's some really smart, interesting threads where people are talking about their personal experience. And I've learned a lot about other people's experiences by reading certain Reddit threads. So earlier I was in a thread, I forget exactly which Reddit thread it was, but about and with folks who identify as asexual. And one person wrote, in order to save our marriage, we both had to learn how to make sex an enjoyable experience for me. He now purposefully and skillfully uses my sensual attraction to make our sexual encounters fun and pleasurable. And as a result, I'm able to get enjoyment out of the experience too. Even though it's not the same type of enjoyment he gets, I'm still repulsed by allowing him to make me orgasm. In other words, she said, the only solution we found was to increase my sex favorability by making him a more skilled lovemaker who uses non-sexual intimacy to make our sex fun. So now you can see where that advice I just gave kind of came from. It was inspired by this thread. Having that conversation with her before we jump to just, no physical intimacy at all, maybe there's a way for the two of you to redefine what sexual intimacy looks like for the two of you that can be mutually fulfilling. I also imagine creating space for in that conversation. Let me rewind. Within that conversation, I can imagine it will be nice and important to create space for intimacy in the way your wife loves that doesn't lead to sex. Like creating moments, because I think that even so many people can feel this, like you want to be able to do things that are like sex adjacent without feeling pressured to actually like have sex. I think even sexual people can feel that way sometimes. Like I want to be able to, be naked and snuggle and not feel like I have to have sex. Creating space in your relationship where you can do some of these things that make her feel good, where sex is not on the table, might help too. Now, as far as the other relationships go, you exploring sex outside of your relationship, I think it's a really interesting idea, and I probably would be willing to try it. However, I would go into it, you don't want to go into it with a blindfold or ignoring the realities. So like one reality, and I'm going to make a judgment about you right now based on the sweetness in which you're writing to me, I'm going to guess that you're not the kind of person that can have like just physical sex and feel satisfied by that. I feel like you want the emotional connection that comes with sex. And the way your wife's framing it now, by no fault of her own, this could just be naivete, right? I don't see a world where you're just like leaving the house for 2 hours, having sex with someone, not having any emotional attachment and coming back. I think that for you to explore this, you're going to have to also reckon with the reality that it's probably going to come with some emotional connection. Even logistically, where are you going to find people to have sex with? You could hire sex workers. And the other option, I mean, I'm sure there's more. I'm framing this very black and white, but like there's the sex worker approach. And then there's like, you're going to go out on dates. You're going to have to like go out one night on the weekend or go to a club, be set up with people. Like you get sex by meeting people and going out and doing those things. And sometimes emotions get involved, especially if you're a sensitive sweetie. So I don't think it's a bad idea, but I think it's unrealistic to assume that you could be emotionally monogamous with your wife while having sex with other people. So this then begins to look more like having a conversation about polyamory or ethical non-monogamy, which is being in multiple romantic sexual relationships. And I think if I were to begin that, if I were to begin that and the sort of catalyst event was my wife is asexual and we're trying to figure out how to make our marriage work, I would probably suggest, I would want to go see a couples therapist that is asexual, polyamory, emotional non-monogamy affirming, meaning they have experience with this, they specialize in these types of relationships, they are in one themselves. I'd want to go see someone who can help me and my partner work through this new opportunity that we are, diving into together. Because I can't really imagine a world where you're going to feel good about, your wife's at home and then you're leaving on Saturday night and you're going to meet someone and then you have sex and you come home and you have to tell your wife about the sex and then repeating that. I'm not sure if that is going to be I'm not sure if that's sustainable. And maybe that's not even what you're referring to. Maybe you are referring to more of a polyamorous situation. And for those, I want to define polyamory right now. I think I can do it, but I am not confident enough to give you the actual correct definition. So let me look it up. God, these AI overviews on Google are actually insane. In my Google search, I typed in polyamory, but I guess that in my Google search bar, I also had asexual and sexual couple from previous research. And the AI overview is telling me now that yes, an asexual person can be in a relationship with a sexual person who is polyamorous. So that would be meaning that maybe your wife, as the asexual person, is not in a polyamorous. She is not poly. She's in a relationship with you monogamously. Monogamously? I'm just going to go with it, monogamously, while you are in a polyamorous relationship. So polyamory, let me go find my actual definition I was just looking for. Polyamory is a practice or philosophy of having more than one romantic or sexual partner at the time, with the knowledge and consent of all parties involved. It's a type of ethical non-monogamy or consensual non-monogamy, which is what I was referring to before. I might have accidentally said emotional non-monogamy. I was trying to say ethical non-monogamy. So that's something that I would explore. And I think it's a good idea for the two of you to explore this together. I really do. And I think it's very brave. I just wouldn't do it on my own. Like I wouldn't try to begin this without any support from an outside community. And if you don't want to find a couples therapist who is, poly affirming, meeting other people, though I think that maybe that's hard to do. Like it's a hard thing to just come out and say, at least at this point in our culture. I think we're becoming much more open. And there are some community groups. Like I know a former coworker of mine actually started a community kind of like friendship networking app in real life event thing. I'm doing a terrible job trying to explain it for people who are in open relationships. Open relationships and polyamorous relationships are different, by the way. So in an open relationship, you can have sex with other people, but you're only emotionally involved with one person, which maybe is what your wife is suggesting. Whereas in a polyamorous relationship, you're committed to you can have multiple loving emotional partners. So that is something maybe for the two of you to talk about. Like, what are you actually suggesting here, wife? And what do I actually think is possible? Do you think it will be possible for you to have sex with other people and put in like the work to have sex with other people and not have your feelings involved? Do you want that? Do you want to be having sex with people without having any emotional connection to it? That's a fair question. And to go back to your desires in the beginning, you have to live within your boundaries and what feels good for you too. And there will be some trial and error here. Like, you've never done this before, so you might try something and it might not feel good, and then you learn. But if you try something and it doesn't feel good, it doesn't mean you're doomed. That's where I'd begin. I'd begin with those questions and kind of keep the conversation open with each other, which it sounds like you two are going to be able to do really, really well. And I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. And again, I think it's really brave and cool and admirable how you're kind of responding to this news with an open heart and open arms for your wife, who I know you love. Please keep me posted. And if anyone is listening who is asexual or in a poly relationship and has some wisdom or life experience that they can chime in with here, please share it. Tell us what's worked for you. If there's anything else you want to add that I didn't touch upon, which, I mean, there's a million things that I didn't touch upon, please do. Like, let's use this as a learning and sharing moment for all of us. And please keep me posted on what happens. Please keep me posted on how you guys, get through this together, because I believe that you can. And I think that this relationship is worth and can be salvaged, or can make it through this. I don't know in what shape or form that will be, because there is the reality. You might realize that you can't give each other what you want in this relationship. And that could be a outcome that you come to. But I think that your friendship and your bond will be intact because of the respect and love that you have for each other. And if you can keep that at the center of your conversations as you move forward, I think you'll be, in good shape to have a strong relationship for the rest of your lives, even if that relationship looks different than you imagined it would when you said I do. Hello, Hayes. I've never written for advice like this before, so this is new for me, and I'm a little out of my comfort zone. I usually go to my friends or mom for things like this, and I'm not even sure you give advice along these lines, but you'll see why I opted for something anonymous. I've been dating my boyfriend for around 7 months now, and he's amazing. I love him a lot, and we have similar visions for the future, and our values are very aligned. We've communicated through issues well, and this is someone I can very much see myself building a life with. There is, however, one thing I keep finding myself stuck on. I have a very high libido, and I'm very open and adventurous sexually, while he's a lot more reserved. As much as we've tried to communicate around this, I find myself still feeling sometimes that our sex life defaults to him having the satisfying sex that he wants because he has the lower, less adventurous desire. Consent is insanely important to me, and I never, ever want him to do anything he's uncomfortable with. It leaves me feeling incredibly conflicted, though, because I feel like he's not willing to explore and open his mind a little for the sake of my needs being met, and I'm worried about this causing resentment. I want to defend him and say that I can see he's trying, and he has definitely opened up and expanded what he's willing to try since we started dating, because he can see how important it is to me. I know we haven't been together for very long, and part of me wonders if I'm just not having enough patience. At the same time, if we're not having crazy, adventurous, teenager-like horny sex right now, will we ever? I'm not sure if I can agree to that forever. I'm a sexual assault survivor, and having a healthy sexual relationship where my needs are met is really important to me. And even though he says he might be willing to try some of the things I enjoy, it never happens. I can live with compromise, Hayes. I know we may never be perfectly in sync with how often we want to do the deed, and he may not want to explore every whim that I have, and that's okay. Without going into too much detail, I want to make it clear that I'm not asking to explore anything wild, although I wouldn't mind that. I'm asking for things like bringing toys into the bedroom, changing up positions more frequently, and more oral. I'm not sure if I'm not bringing it up in the right way, or if this is going to be an incompatibility that's unfixable. I love him so deeply, and I want to make progress on this issue before taking steps like moving in and considering marriage, especially because I have an extremely busy career. How do I talk to him about this better? I'm careful about using I statements, and I've told him how important it is to me, but maybe I'm too sensitive when I bring it up. I don't want him to think I don't enjoy the intimacy we do have, because I love it. I just want a little more, and I'm not sure how to navigate this. Yours, horny and hopeful. Okay, so where do I begin? I think for starters, I'll say that I think so many women, in particular, women in relationships with men, will default to having the sex life the man wants. And so often the sex life the man wants becomes the sex life the woman thinks she wants, or becomes the one she has, and therefore she becomes okay with it. But kind of is just like pushing down her own individual desires. And I'm such an advocate for what you're doing, because I think And I'm so glad you wrote me this letter, and I felt inspired to respond to it because it's still this like kind of unspoken, because the reality is you can be in a loving relationship. I think it can be confusing when you feel empowered in every other area, yet you feel quiet in this one. And I just am such an advocate for speaking up for what you want sexually, especially in the relationships that you feel safe to do so, right? If you don't feel safe to do so, there's a difference between feeling unsafe to speak up for your sexual wants and awkward about it. Maybe that's what I'm trying to point out. You should definitely not be in a relationship where you feel unsafe to talk about your sexual preferences and desires. But feeling awkward is like much more. It's almost like when you feel awkward about it, it's kind of sticky territory because you're not sure how to interpret what your awkwardness means. And I think the awkwardness often means is that we've been conditioned to feel awkward and uncomfortable to talk about what we want in bed. And now's the time to practice. It might feel uncomfortable to say what you want. But we have to work through that discomfort for ourselves. We owe it to ourselves. And the right man will not be threatened by you sharing what you want. Shouldn't just say man, partner, though I think that part of what we're talking about here is specific to like the woman-man dynamic. I have a question for you. The thing you said about crazy, adventurous, teenager-like horny sex, you said, if we're not having that kind of sex now, will we ever? And I'm kind of curious, like, when you say that, is there specific sex that you've had that you're thinking of? Where is that visual of teenager-like horny sex coming from? I think it's important to ask yourself that and to figure it out. Is it coming from porn? Is it coming from like a past relationship you had that felt good, or maybe that didn't feel good, yet you're comparing things to that subconsciously, or it's like a part of a trauma response? Is it from a movie? I think it's important to acknowledge where that visual is coming from, because I think a lot of times crazy teenage horny sex, that description is usually made up. And the good sex that you can have will kind of surpass that. It won't fit within the confines of that type of description because it'll be unique to you and your relationship. But the fact that you've put it out there makes me wonder if you're searching for something that doesn't actually exist. And you might be better served by visualizing the sex life you want from scratch, rather than saying it's got to be like teenager crazy horny sex. Because you could just be setting yourself up for disappointment when that reality might not exist. But a different reality that includes the things you want does. But I would maybe try not to put like a label on it for what you want your sex to look like, so that you're protecting yourself from not comparing the sex you're having to something that isn't real. I do think the stuff you want is real, though. That's not what I'm trying to say. I think the stuff you want is real and totally manageable, and not asking too much. I think that you said the stuff you're not asking for is too wild. Like, it would be okay if it was wild too, but let's be super clear for all of the hazelnuts. Like, the stuff you're asking for isn't wild. Bringing toys into the bedroom, changing positions, and more oral, that's like pretty basic for two people that want to be having sex with each other and that are comfortable with the act of sex with each other, right? You're not asking him to break any boundaries, right? Like, if someone were to say to you that, like, I don't do oral as a boundary, like, what the fuck? What the fuck is what I would say to that. That's so juvenile and immature. Though I don't think that's what your boyfriend's saying. Though I am curious if you've expressed to him that's something you want more, or something you've asked for while you're having sex. If he hasn't done it, what's that about? I'm curious how comfortable you are with taking the lead. Because one solution here might involve you taking the lead a little bit. Like, is there a chance that you've been wanting him to like read your mind? I know you said that you've mentioned these things before, but maybe not only have you been wanting him to, give you more, like go down on you more, but you're also wanting him to initiate going down on you, which is totally a fair thing to want. Though I wonder actually, I'm not going to use the going down on you as an example, because like I kind of think that he should be able to, do that himself, but maybe with the toys. Let's say you want to bring in a vibrator. Instead of like hoping that he goes and buys a vibrator and brings it in, could you do that yourself? Could you take the initiative there to get it and to say, like, I got something that I think will be really fun and I really want to try with you. Like, can we do it later? Would you be okay with that? Or would that still feel like a disappointment for you? Because maybe that's what he needs. He needs like a little bit of a push, or for you to model a little bit how serious you are about this by just doing it. And if you want him to take the lead, we can work our way up to that. But maybe you taking the initiative and getting the sex toy and bringing it into the bedroom, or mentioning to him, like maybe you want to mention it to him beforehand. There's two ways you could approach that. Like, you could say it during sex, which maybe I wouldn't do if he has any insecurity. Like mid-sex could be, for something like a toy, could make him feel insecure. I'd maybe bring that up later. Like if you like leave, I don't know if you live together. I don't think you live together. You could send him a little flirtatious text that you got something, that you have a surprise tonight and you want to try something together. Like, do a little bit of that and put in the legwork yourself and see how he responds. And then later you can say, I really liked that. And it would really turn me on if you suggested, like if you brought it up yourself. Things like switching positions. Like, I think that during sex, that's something that's okay for you to bring up yourself. Like, if you are lying there and you want to switch it up, don't feel, instead of just feeling frustrated that he hasn't flipped you over, like, you switch it up yourself. Tell him what feels good, what you like, and maybe he'll start to learn that way. And if he's not catching on, tell him, I loved how we did so many different positions. Like, taking the lead in that way and affirming, kind of couching it with, I really like this, instead of, you don't do this enough, might be a helpful way for him to get what you're saying. Though, like, why isn't he getting what you're saying? You said, maybe I've been too sensitive. I guess if you think back to the conversations you've had with him about sex, like, have you been, by sensitive, do you mean indirect? Like, have you been making small comments here and there, hoping that he understands what you mean and hoping that he just like gets it? Because sometimes guys are like dumb, like it could be kind of innocent and he's just like a little more vanilla than you and hasn't understood that you've been communicating your needs. I'm not trying to, maybe you have, like maybe you've been super explicit, but I'd say it's time to be even more explicit. And you don't need to frame it. Being explicit doesn't mean necessarily being like serious and like, hey, we have a problem. Though I do think that if you've expressed like wanting him to go down on you more and he's not doing that, that to me is more problem territory, because that kind of suggests because like I bet he likes when you go down on him, right? That discrepancy suggests a little bit more of like he's got some what am I looking for? It's not like misogynistic. It feels a little bit closer to like misogyny. Misogyny might be too strong of a word. I don't know the word I'm reaching for, but it feels a little bit like he doesn't care about your pleasure as much as he cares about his. And like you don't want to, or if he's like grossed out by that or something, like that's not a man worthy of a woman of your caliber. You mentioned that you're a survivor, and I don't know if it's necessary at this point in your relationship, but I'm curious if he knows about that, and or how in your own like recovery journey from this and how you've healed from that experience, how much is this is a question I'm asking you. I don't have the answer to this. How much is your desire for a specific type of sex linked to your healing from your assault? And is he aware of that? I don't think the things you're asking for, like more oral, toys, etc., to me, that's very kind of baseline, like, yeah, of course you want that, and of course you deserve that. If there's anything more, like anything deeper going on here, which it sounds like there is, though I don't know to what extent, does he know about that? And it might not be important for him to know at this point. 7 months of a relationship is kind of a different amount of time for everybody. I don't know what you're comfortable sharing with him. Though as your relationship goes on, I imagine it'll be helpful for you to talk about sex with him if he understands where you're coming to the conversation from. You're coming to the conversation from a different perspective than somebody who hasn't been through what you've been through, right? Even the way you're talking about how consent really matters to you, and you want to make sure he's having sex in a way that feels consensual for him. Like, whew, I'm getting hot. It just struck me the way you said, am I being too sensitive when I brought this up? Like, I don't think there's a way where you could be too sensitive in bringing this up. It's a sensitive topic. You're a sensitive, kind person. Like, bring your full self to this conversation. The only things I wouldn't do are, like, bring up dissatisfaction while you're having sex. Like, I would try to choose a very neutral, like if you're going for a walk, or just a very neutral time to bring up things you want more. If it gets to the point where you're like, hey, I've been asking you to go down on me for months and you don't, like, what's going on? Which is a fair thing to ask, by the way. It might make you nervous and uncomfortable to bring it up, but I think it's important to bring up. If you are expressing your desires for something and your, monogamous partner, I don't know why I said monogamous. Are you guys monogamous? But like your boyfriend, the person you're choosing to be with, isn't doing those things when you're asking in the moment. And if you're listening to this and you're like, hey, I've done all of these things. Like, I've brought it up in the moment, I've brought it up outside of the moment, and he's just not changing, then I think it might be time to tell him, hey, over the last couple of months, I've brought up a bunch that I want to do this and this and this in bed. And we've sort of like loosely talked about it, but nothing more serious. And I wanted to know how you feel about all of that. You kind of seemed like you were okay with it when I brought it up, but then it's never happened. So I thought I should ask you, like, what are your feelings about some of those ideas I had? And see what he says. Maybe you'll learn something about him and where he's coming to this conversation from. But you could start to get a sense of why he hasn't initiated some of the stuff you've asked him to. And from there, it could be an incompatibility. I don't think we know that yet. But it very well might be an incompatibility. And I think it's an incompatibility worth paying attention to. Your sexual chemistry and how you're able to work through sexual desires together and kind of overcome that awkward, kind of uncomfortable moment of talking about it at first is really important for a long-term, happy relationship where you're probably going to have new desires that come up. And it's a great time now to be starting to practice talking about them. Oh, you could also ask him questions like about what sex should be. Like maybe over dinner one night, it could be fun to have a conversation about sex and ask him, like, what is good sex to you? Ask him to describe it, and then you can describe it, and you can ask him what turns him on. Now, that type of conversation might be a little uncomfortable for him. It might be uncomfortable for you. So maybe doing it at dinner isn't great if the evidence we have about your boyfriend is that he might feel a little shyer about some of these things. But trying to have a conversation about what is good sex when you're not having sex could be a great way to learn about each other and learn about each other's needs in a moment where, like, he doesn't have any pressure to perform if he feels any of that, and you're not in a moment when you're like trying to see if your desires are met. You're just having a conversation, a sexy conversation that could lead to like some fun. But in the moment, it's just about talking and getting to know each other. Because this is a piece of each other that you're still getting to know clearly. And 7 months is kind of a long time, but not so long that you would have already learned everything there is to know about each other. So I think the biggest takeaway is when you're talking about this with him is like to be framing it in a fun way, unless it's already been framed in a fun way and he's not taking you seriously. And then it can be framed in a more serious way. Just make sure you're being direct. Be direct. Say what you want. Anything else I have to say about this one? Thanks, Horny and Hopeful, for opening up this conversation. Hello, Hayes. My boyfriend and I have been thinking about becoming more intimate soon. We're both really excited about it and feel ready and comfortable. We've talked about almost everything I think a couple needs to before making this step, but I'm not sure what to do about one thing that I know I'm being a bit hypocritical about. I've already set the boundary with my boyfriend that I wouldn't like it if he discussed our physical relationship with his friends, and I know I should give him that same respect. But this is going to be a big thing for me, and I think I'll want to talk through the feelings I'm having with a friend. I was raised Catholic and anticipate having a complicated emotional response to sex because of that. My boyfriend is also Catholic, but I think most of us can agree that the pressures placed on girls in religious experiences are a lot greater. My family is not somewhere I can turn to have this kind of talk. They would place a lot of judgment and not much else. I have a friend who had similar mixed anticipations to her first time due to religion. She's talked about it with me a little, and I think she'd be a good person for me to talk with, just to help me process my emotions and not feel guilty for something that I don't believe is wrong. What do you think I should do here? I know I can't talk to her without telling my boyfriend, but they're also friends, and I think it would make him uncomfortable. At the same time, I think I need someone outside of my relationship to talk about this. Yours, first timer. Thank you for writing. I'm so glad you did. I can see the conundrum, and I can see how you feel torn between, wanting to do the right thing by yourself and by your boyfriend. One thing that I really want you to know as you're beginning, like you've been in a relationship with your boyfriend, but when you have sex, your relationships do change. I want you to know that you can have private conversations that your boyfriend doesn't know about. Your boyfriend does not need to have eyes and opinions about everything you share with your inner circle, even if and when it relates to him. Now, that doesn't mean I'm recommending that you share all of the details of your sex life and the most intimate nuggets from your relationship or things from his private life with your friends. I'm definitely not advocating for that. But when you have sex with someone, you are an equal in that sexual experience. And it is your experience to talk about as much as it's their experience. It's not one. I don't think that you have sex with him and therefore the two of you need to agree on every single opinion you have about it, way you talk about it. It's a shared experience, yes, but it's also still an individual experience. And I think what I'm wanting to protect you from is this idea that once you have sex with him, like he has to approve everything you do. You're allowed to tell your friend and talk with your friend about this experience without telling him. You don't need his permission. You're allowed to have a private conversation about losing your virginity with your friend that your boyfriend doesn't know about. I know that makes you uncomfortable, but I want you to challenge that. I want you to try to challenge that idea that you'd have to tell him that you told her that you were losing your virginity. You don't. You might choose to tell him, but you do not have to. And I would recommend that you talk with someone else other than your boyfriend about this thing that you feel ready to do. I absolutely would recommend that. I don't think that having secret sex, if you can avoid it, is generally a good thing. There's lots of reasons why I know some people will hide who they're having sex with. If they, are gay, for example, and haven't come out, they may be hiding their relationship. I think that community and having people to talk with is really important for, warding off feelings of loneliness or conflict that can sometimes come up because sex is complicated and you are inviting new complications into your life. I agree with you. I don't think it's wrong. My beliefs tell me that it is not wrong. And if you feel ready, if you and your boyfriend feel ready and you're, approaching this safely, then power to you. But I don't want you to enter this like new stage of your life, this sexual stage of your life with the idea that you can't tell your friends anything without your boyfriend knowing. Now, I don't know if your boyfriend's making you feel that way or if this is just new for you and you're, being extra cautious and being extra sensitive here. Has he said to you, you can't tell anybody about this? We can never tell anybody about this? If so, I would probably wait. I probably wouldn't have sex under those conditions. I would not have sex under the conditions of nobody being able to know except for the two of us. That, to me, would feel like a trap. I want to know that whatever feelings I have, I can talk to someone about them. I may not know who the person is going to be that I talk with yet, but I want to know for sure that I'm able to. And someone trying to control or tell me that I can't would feel really stifling and unsafe for me. And look, there's ways that you can talk to your friend about losing your virginity and having sex with your boyfriend without crossing a line. You can keep the conversation focused on your emotional experience. You don't have to tell her, first we laid down on the bed and then he took out the condom and this awkward thing happened when he tried to slip it on. Like, you don't have to do that. And I think in your relationship, he can trust and he should trust that you would never be trying to embarrass him. You're not spilling details for the sake of gossiping and having a story to tell. You're talking with a friend who's been through a similar experience to you to help process a significant life change. And this friend who also grew up Catholic and has had sex and had a similar reaction, like, she sounds like a good person to talk with. I think the fact that you're thinking of her is just like a good sign, and that you know how to build community. So don't feel guilty about talking to this friend, and don't feel guilty about talking to this friend without running it by your boyfriend. If it would make you feel more comfortable, you could say to him, I want to have sex with you. I feel ready to do this. But I think it's important that we each have other people in our life to talk to about it. And I've been thinking it would be like, I know that I have this person to confide in. Do you have someone to confide in? Maybe he's looking for you to give him that permission too. Maybe he wants to hear that he can tell someone about it. And love, this is a good moment for you. Do you trust him? Do you trust him to, confide in a friend in the way that you are going to confide in a friend? If not, that's an important thing to think about. Like, why would I be uncomfortable? Why don't I trust that he can talk about us having sex in a way that's respectful? When we think about having safe sex, I think we often think about safety in terms of like physical safety, make sure you're using protection, that kind of thing. But I want you to think about your emotional safety too. And you are. And part of your emotional safety includes your support system. And having safe sex means ensuring that you have access to that support system and that you feel empowered to use it. And if you don't, I wouldn't have sex yet with this person or in this moment. I know you said the thing about like your friend and your boyfriend are friends and it would make him uncomfortable. Okay, and he can get over it. Like everybody, when you're in relationships, most people know that you're having sex, right? Like I could tell, my friends know that I'm having sex with my husband. They knew I was having sex with Brian before he was my husband, vice versa. Like it's not, I want to empathize with the fact that in your community, that might not be as common. And maybe some of your friends have different beliefs than you, fine. But this friend doesn't. This friend that you want to share with has the same belief as you and your boyfriend. Again, he should trust that you're not gossiping about him, you're not out to embarrass him, but I'd hope that he's comfortable with a mutual friend simply knowing that the two of you have had sex. Like that's not asking for too much. I'm excited for you, and I don't think you're being hypocritical, to address something you said earlier in your letter. I don't think you're being hypocritical. You are changing your mind. As new information comes about, you're changing your mind. Changing your mind is not being a hypocrite. We are all allowed to change our mind. What might be hypocritical is if he said, yeah, I really kind of feel similarly and I want to share it with a friend, and you told him he couldn't. That would be hypocritical. But I don't think you're going to do that. I think now with this kind of new understanding of what safe sex means, it means having a support system outside of the person you're having sex with. I think that you're not hypocritical. You are cautious. And I think it's smart to be cautious. And I'm proud of you for being cautious. Being cautious with this and taking this seriously, I think, is setting you up for success, to have an enjoyable experience. And you're going to be prepared to deal with any of the complicated emotions that arise. So, proud of you. That's all we got for today's episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't left a review yet, 5-star reviews only, please go ahead and leave one. Follow, subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen, YouTube, audio. Thank you so much, and I will see you next week.